Welcome back to the Queer Circle podcast, where queer healers come to the mic to share their journeys and what they tell their younger selves. Today's guest is Tavi Hawn, a non-binary, trans, multiracial indigiqueer and two-spirit person with Chalagi, English, Irish, and West African roots. They hold a master's degree in theological studies and a master's degree in social work from University of Washington, Seattle. They're a gender therapist, trainer, and public speaker based in Baltimore, Maryland. Welcome to the Queer Circle, Tavi.
Well, I was born in the mountains of North Carolina 3 years after my parents had a baby who died a few days after he was born. And an energy healer told me a few years ago that that experience made it hard for my mom to have to be able to open her heart to me when I was in the womb and after that. And I was born with my legs completely turned inward. And so from birth, I was put into a body cast from the waist down. And that was to slowly turn my legs inward and my legs and hips to sort of reshape them over time. And apparently it was really painful and I would scream all the time. Eventually I was able to be put into leg braces. And that was around the time that most babies start crawling or walking. So I wasn't able to do those things. And instead, I just started speaking in complete sentences, which I think was kind of funny to see this little baby completely talking in sentences. But I like to think that I came into the world with an obstacle and I figured out a way around it. As a kid, I liked a lot of different things. I was a really curious kid, just interested in the world around me. And when I was 3 years old, I said that I wanted to be a man for Halloween. And so I dressed up and wore a fedora, these big glasses, had a little mustache, and had this t-shirt that looked like a tuxedo. And I was so excited. I was so proud of myself. And so I started trick-or-treating. And then really fast, I realized, oh, wait, I'm supposed to be a specific man. People kept asking me, who are you? Who are you? And I was like, oh, I have to be a certain man. And so the next person that asked me that, I just blurted out the first thing that came into my head, which was Mr. Baloney Head. Um, and so that's what I was going around telling people who I was. At the same time, I also really liked wearing these frilly, poofy dresses that were fun to twirl around in. And being feminine was something that was very much reinforced, very much the message of how I was supposed to be with family and also just everybody that I was around at the time. Somehow when I was around like 9 or 10, I convinced one of my grandmothers, and growing up, one of my grandmothers is the one who bought all of me and my siblings clothes because my parents couldn't afford to buy us the clothes. So this grandmother, somehow I convinced her to buy me this velvet that probably wasn't real velvet, but I thought it was velvet suit. and and so she bought it for me and I loved it. I thought I looked so good in it. I remember like walking around with my hands in the pockets of the suit and just feeling really good. And I didn't really have any major realizations about myself as a kid in that way. Um, except for when I was around 11, I asked for a football for Christmas. And I got a Nerf football. And that really bummed me out. And it was a really clear message to me And I remember having this sinking feeling when I got the football because I realized then, oh, there's this box that I'm going to continue to be put in over and over and over. And there's really didn't feel like there was a way out of it. And then when it was time to go to my first middle school dance, I dressed in my favorite outfit at the time, which was my basketball shorts, Jordans, and a brand new Jordan t-shirt. Um, and I felt like I looked so good. I was ready to go. I was so excited. And I show up to the dance and I realize, oh, all the girls are wearing dresses and all the boys are wearing suits and ties or button downs and ties. Um, and in those kind of situations, I realized I was pretty different than everybody around me. I felt embarrassed for not wearing the right thing, but also sad because I was wearing what I wanted to be wearing, and I knew that I wasn't supposed to want to wear that. And then growing up, me and my sibling got a lot of questions and comments about our racial identity and appearance, just things like, what are you? Where's your family from? My sibling would get asked, are you white? Are you black? Or are you mixed? Um, and also asked in a way that was like those were the only mixtures that were possible. And my family also gave us a lot of mixed messages, and they didn't really know how to talk about race. There was a lot of trauma in my family and internalized depression and shame. And we also were cut off from whole sides of our family. And some of my family I'm only just now starting to be able to meet as an adult. And so race was always a confusing topic for me growing up and even into my early adulthood. Well, we moved around a lot in North Carolina growing up. And then when I was about to go into high school, we moved to South Carolina, and I really didn't like it there. I definitely stood out. And I was different in the way that I thought about things and the way that I talked and the way that I dressed. The town we moved to had a lot of open racism. And for me, I've always been a really intuitive, empathic person. And I just sensed this overall violent tone and feeling and heaviness to the place. Um, and and I was really brutally bullied pretty much every day there. Um, I was told at school that I was ugly, that I was dirty, I smelled bad, nobody would ever want me. I was called a whore and a lesbian. I was called a devil worshiper. And lesbian was a huge insult because there wasn't a single out queer or trans person in the whole town or school. Um, so people would say, don't go into the bathroom with them. You don't know what they might do. Um, and they would yell these things at me. They would write them on my school books. They would write them on my desk, and they would just say them to my face. And I really couldn't, for the life of me, figure out why do these people hate me so much. Um, for the most part, I just kept to myself since I got there. But they really targeted me from the beginning, and I really started to believe the things that they said. I got really depressed and I got really self-destructive. I started hanging out with people who were a lot older than me, and I got into a lot of really dangerous stuff. I did have two friends at school, and none of us had labeled our sexuality or really even talked about it at all. But we weren't straight. And one day the school called my mom and told her that I was seen kissing one of my friends at school, and that kind of thing. So queer kissing was definitely not allowed at school. And so my mom was waiting for me when I got home with this really scary look on her face and asked, "Are you gay?" And I was pretty terrified because I thought my family will kick me out or they'll send me away. if I say yes. And so I absolutely denied it. And she just looked at me and said, nobody in the family is going to find out what happened. You're not to say a word about this ever again. And basically, like, this is not happening. So I really heard that and knew, okay, maybe this isn't an option for me. Maybe I really can't be this way. Um, or else, I'm going to lose a lot and I don't really know what's going to happen. And also around that time, I I told my parents that I had been sexually abused by an uncle when I was young. I was maybe ages 5 to 6. And he wasn't a blood relative, but we had lots of uncles and aunties. Um, and that was really hard for my parents to accept that he would do that. And so they just chose not to believe it. Um, and that was pretty traumatic for me at the time to realize, I could share something like that, and then have people not believe me. And so that was sort of um, another way that I felt very alone in the world. I think that surviving those things made me say to myself that I never wanted any other young person to feel as alone as I had as a teenager. I didn't want them to feel as different or as hopeless as I had felt. And that's one of the reasons that I started Chords, the summer camp for queer and trans youth and youth of queer and trans families in North Carolina. Um, the experiences that I had growing up also gave me a deep understanding of the negative messages about who we are that can separate us from family and culture, and the ways that shame can affect our lives. When I was 21, I moved out to San Francisco so that I could experience a totally different environment than how I grew up. I loved it and I made a lot of good friends. One of my closest friends there was a musician and artist, and we had a really special bond. We hung out all the time. I moved away and then we lost a little bit. And the year that I moved away, I learned that he died of suicide. And listening to my own intuition, I'm pretty sure that he was closeted and that that was a factor in his death. And that makes me so, so sad. And it took me a long time to publicly be my full self. It was a journey, and I had to first be honest with myself and then slowly get the courage to be honest with more and more people about my sexuality and then gender. Um, I knew that I would lose things in the process, and I wasn't sure, what all those things would be. Um, and, I think that my friend that I lost was facing some of the same questions and fears. Um, and I think that I was able to have some experiences and relationships along the way that gave me that courage, to move more and more into who I really was. I think for me, this comes back to the question about mentors. At every stage of my journey, pretty much from my early 20s on, I've had friends who I could see living their truth. And those friends gave me a little bit more courage. They gave me a little bit more possibility and understanding about the many different ways of being that there are. And I think publicly, as I came out to people, I had a lot of folks who were like, oh, yeah, I've known this about you for a long time. Or, oh, yeah, I always just thought you were queer. Um, and that gave me peace. To hear those responses gave me peace at the same time I was dealing with family rejection or judgment by other people in my life. To have people be like, oh yeah, I saw you, this whole time I saw you, felt really good. And I think, in some ways it felt like I was part of the community, even when I wasn't announcing it, out to the world. And that felt good to be seen that way. And my understanding of my gender identity was kind of entwined in really understanding more about my racial identity and background. And I'm really lucky that I had some friends like LL Himeno, who I had a lot of conversations with during that time, elders like Mandy Carter, who she volunteered as a camp counselor at Cords one year, and was just one of the best camp counselors that we had. And I really loved that intergenerational time where, there was someone who was, I don't know her age at the time, in her 60s or 70s, you know, hanging out and playing with kids who were 13, um, and telling stories and sharing the stories of things that she went through. Um, right now, I have an elder, Judy Talwing McCarthy, who's one of my baby's grandmothers, and she's a two-spirit mentor and relative. And having that relationship has been really meaningful to me, and really being able to hear her stories, to have her encouragement, just, I don't know, I think there's just something really powerful in that. And I think it's important for all of us um, to have intergenerational relationships. So to have relationships with folks younger than us and also older than us, um, it just really makes my life more rich to have that. And I've just been blessed to have certain people come into my life at just the right point in my journey. So the ways that I believe is that they really were brought to me at a certain time, to learn a certain thing or to share a certain experience. Um, and so I do feel really blessed to have had that. I think because of knowing what it feels like to be abandoned and to not be welcomed in, I've always built community wherever I've been and hoped that those spaces could let other folks feel a sense of belonging. Um, it's really important to me to feel that there's a space for everybody to feel like this is where I belong, this is where I fit, this is my home. Um, and because of all the different life experiences I've had now and just more time on this earth, and I don't think I understood this as much when I was younger, but I've learned that things are usually not simple, and things are not usually clear extremes. Things are not in binaries. There's a lot of complexity to situations and to people. And I think a lot of problems in communication and in relationships can be avoided if we're able to recognize and honor complexity. And another offering I have is the message to community that we're a legacy. We come from a long line of people, and we're also in the process of becoming ancestors. We're the dream of those who came before us. And so we need to be careful and intentional about the kind of communities that we're creating for the next generations. Are we shaping communities that we actually would want to be a part of? I love the idea of this podcast around storytelling and sharing stories, because I think our stories are powerful. And I think there's there's something healing about both sharing your story and also hearing somebody else's story. There's like an exchange that happens. Um, and I think it's something I hope that we can all do more of that. Um, just asking people, what's your story, and listening. And then it's hard sometimes to share our stories. It can feel really vulnerable, or scary or painful, but sometimes it's healing just to say some of these things out loud. Well, I would say to my child self, you are who you're meant to be. You're medicine, you're a gift, you're beautiful and handsome and kind and fierce. Your ancestors are proud of you, and there are people who are going to need you to be yourself. And I came across this quote by Joy Harjo that says, at least I've had to come to that in my life, to realize that this stuff called failure, this debris of historical trauma, family trauma, stuff that can kill your spirit, is actually raw material to make things with and to build a bridge. You can use those materials to build a bridge over that which would destroy you. And so I think just knowing that the things that we feel like might destroy us are things that we can actually use to build bridges. And I also think of us as people, sometimes we are the bridge. I know that I wouldn't be the person I am, and I wouldn't be the healer that I am without the things that I went through in my life. And the experiences that I've had, I just wouldn't be able to do that work, not in the same way.
Thank you for joining us today, Tavi. If you'd like to learn more about Tavi's work, check out their website, hawntherapyandconsulting.com, or on Instagram at hawntherapyandconsulting. For this information and more, check out our website, queercirclepodcast.com. Music from today's episode provided by Purple Fluorite, available wherever music is streamed.